Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch, and this week my guest is Vickie Janson, the Victorian State Director of Australian Christians. Welcome, Vickie.
Thank you, Gavin. Nice to be here.
Good. Well, we're here today because people outside are celebrating Moomba, and that's a cultural experience and many languages, and I'm sort of fascinated by language a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So,
me too.
Good. Okay, so you're kind of got some Polish blood and
Well,
New
I
Zealand
recently discovered that, so yes, yeah.
So what's the story behind that?
The story behind that? Well, I was... when I was born, I didn't actually ever meet my father. My mum and dad separated before I was born, so I didn't actually know his heritage. So, you know, it's one of those things that you always wonder who he was.
Yes.
You know, people often said to me, what is it about you? Are you Middle Eastern? Are you Greek? I had suspected all my life that I was Greek because my grandmother told me that. So it was a bit of a shock, actually, to find out that I wasn't partly Greek. It was only last year that I found out my natural father had a Polish heritage. So that was, very interesting. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, well now I believe there's another little interesting highlight in your life, and that was with your grandmother. And she, in a moment of time, had things change for you. What was that moment? Do you want to describe it? Yes,
well, of course, I can't actually remember it. When my young mother, became pregnant with me, she was in a less than perfect relationship, less than perfect circumstances, and was just a young girl. And she decided that she didn't really want a baby. In fact, she didn't really want the first one, my brother, who was a year older, and she didn't want me either. So she wanted to abort me, and my grandmother intervened. She just had that moral conviction that's not the right thing to do. Then my mother wanted to adopt me out, but you know, my grandmother said, no, we'll look after her, you must keep her. So if it hadn't been for my grandmother, I don't think we'd be actually having this conversation, Gavin.
Right, so you're not an aberration?
No. I'm not an aberration. I'm actually here. And and life, might have been difficult, but I'm very grateful that my grandmother intervened and had a bigger picture than just the circumstances of the moment.
And is she still alive to see how your life's...
No, she's not, but she did see me change into a relatively balanced young woman. So
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, yeah, some years ago. No, she passed on quite a few years ago.
Did she?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
and not only with the background of coming from New Zealand and a little bit of Polish blood there, you're an Australian citizen.
That's right. I became an Australian citizen a number of years ago when I really had an awakening about some of the things happening in society and some of the attitudes, and I guess because I'd become a Christian in Australia, I'd sort of had this journey where things looked different. You see things through a different lens, and truth became very important to me. Life became very important to me. The idea that things can be redeemed became, it's very real to me. My whole life became redeemed, and despite my difficult background, I saw that where there is life, there is hope. And I think that's one of the main themes of this whole program, isn't it? Is that where there is life, there is hope. And dear me, I've just forgotten where we were going with that question.
No, that's fine. But we're looking at a little bit of heritage and history. As an Australian citizen, you're here, and
yeah.
Of course there are some important components about truth and life and valuing it all.
Yes, that's right. Faith, family and freedom actually are the things that I think are worth being a voice for, and
yes.
I think we have a responsibility to be a voice for those who haven't got a voice.
So being a Christian, it probably wouldn't surprise me if you've heard some terms thrown around like, are you a bigot?
Yes, I've heard that term a few times actually. And look, I acknowledge that the Christian way of life is, to follow a narrow way. But as I think we alluded to earlier, it doesn't mean that you're narrow-minded. And in fact, if we look around the world to see who are the most inclusive, tolerant societies in the world who do embrace people who are open and transparent, of course they're inevitably Judeo-Christian societies. So the argument actually that you're bigoted and narrow because you have this belief seems quite crazy when the Western civilization was founded on these beliefs that have actually produced very open societies.
Yes, it's interesting how we use words, how we throw them at each other.
Absolutely.
I think being conservative, and I would probably say I was a little that way, that all I'm doing is erring on the side of caution. Because, I was told as a child, the stove is hot, don't touch it.
Yes, yeah.
And so you end up with a burn. Well, that's fine. If you go and touch it again, within a short period of time you'll have a second-degree burn, and if you touch it a third time, it'll be a third-degree burn. So you kind of learn from those experiences. Now,
gosh, that sounds like common sense, Gavin. Where did you get that from?
Well, I don't know. I must have been reading a dictionary or a book on life.
Yes.
But coming back to experiences that you've had, did you ever burn your finger?
Well, yes. I mean, my, if you like, narrative of life was I'm nobody's child. And I used to sing that, that song was played on the turntable of my heart and in my head right up until it was my late 20s. And I used to actually sing it all the time and actually hear it. It was a song that was embedded into who I was. I'm nobody's child. And that was because, I had been abandoned by my father. As far as I understood, this is my reality. He was never there, never met him. I had been rejected and abandoned by my mother. So I'd had that experience of not having the opportunity of having a mum and a dad around. And so I suppose and that did have an impact on me, and it's made me realise how important it is to be a voice for the fatherless. And of course, a lot of this is all about being a voice for the fatherless, and that it's not hopeless. Even though life was difficult, I think I was quite shocked. I read an article by Susie O'Brien in the Herald Sun some time ago, and she was saying that if you are an unwanted child, then your life is, you're better off aborted. Well, I wouldn't be here, and I believe in redemption.
Well, thank you, Vickie. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and our guest is Vickie Janson. Well, Vickie, we finished on an interesting note before the break, and that was about fatherhood.
Yes, yes.
Why is that important to you?
Well, I suppose, it is a bit personal, and I often tell people this little story. I was at a party one night talking with a young man about the issue of abortion, and he had the position that it was a woman's right to terminate or exterminate, if we use the correct language about what we're doing here, the unborn child. And I was arguing, well, look, I wouldn't be standing here. And his position was, oh, you're taking this too personally, Vickie. And I said, well, usually when your parents want to, terminate your life, it is fairly personal. And I just thought it was interesting how we have got to, as a society, that now fathers aren't important. That my father wouldn't have had a say in that at all. I often, think that one of the major problems in our society is fatherlessness. Too many absent fathers, and that fathers are actually important. And we all have had to struggle who didn't have a father. We all struggle with identity issues. And I think it's just so important that we recognise the role of fathers in family, and that it's not a woman's right to deny a child a father.
There's perhaps another angle to this too. I'm a male and a father and a husband. And I had a friend of the family, a woman come up to me and said, Gavin, we don't need you anymore. We just can go to a sperm bank and get a handful and place it where it should go.
Exactly.
And you're dispensed with. Well,
that's right. You see, and that's the thing. We are actually dehumanising people. With abortion, we dehumanise life here, and we dehumanise men by considering that they're just a sperm donor, which in historically, it's women have just been baby machines. It's just a reverse wrong, moral wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right. And so the fact is that all people are valued. Men and women are different. I'm sorry, I don't think we're equal in that sense. We're different. and equal before God, equal in every way, but we are different. And I think we need to value those differences and recognise that a child will perform better in all ways if they have the opportunity of a mum and a dad.
Yes. It's easy, I guess, to fall into the trap to be prejudiced about something or someone. It's almost an irrational response. How have you bumped into that?
Well, yes, people think that you are bigoted and that you're denying them their rights. But if we take the emotion out of it, does anybody have the right to take another life? I mean, the fact is that all that language is emotionally loaded. It's not even intelligent dialogue. It's not reasonable debate. And it really is just name-calling. And that is the problem, is that we have to go, well, what is reasonable? When is it reasonable to take another person's life? And I think there's a 180.com DVD that's very good that looks at that with young people. When is it okay? And then you see, if you follow the argument, you have to say, well, what's wrong with the Holocaust? I mean, really, when is it okay to take a life?
I think with prejudice, if it's an unconscious thing, it's just you find that there's something you like or you don't like, you've not really thought about it.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's fine, but if it's meant to be detrimental and you use prejudice in a way to actually do damage,
yeah.
with that intent, there's
malicious
a problem.
intent. I mean, yes, malicious intent is malicious intent. It's
yes.
wrong. You know, I think it's morally wrong. You know, we should be able to argue our position without people wanting to, you know, send you death threats. I've had that sort of thing before, where people want to, you know, wish you would never be born and, you know, hope you have a horrible death. That sort of stuff is just ridiculous. It's beyond the pale. It's not civilised. And I think that we have to raise the discussion above that level.
Good, because there's a lot of that kind of anger.
Horrible anger.
That's out there. And I'm, you know, concerned, I suppose, because of the access to Twitter and, you know, all of those little tags that run along TV programs. There's some hurt and anger and grief out there.
Yes.
Let's come back on the word hurt.
Yes, I was just thinking about that as you said it. I've got a favourite saying about the word hurt. Hurting people hurt other people. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. We want to stop people hurting other people, but help the people who are hurt. And this is a really difficult thing. Some people want to justify things that, you know, we've done or our family members have done, or it's part of our heritage or culture or story, and we justify it, and so we're going to hurt others that would suggest it isn't right. But actually they're hurting themselves. And so I think you have to come up and hit reality to be free from that, hit the truth. So we have to think outside of our own story to understand our story.
Well, we're telling a story today.
Yes.
It's your story.
Oh, okay.
So let's look at hurt in your life and how you've overcome that.
Hurt in my life. Well, for a long time, I just kept it internalised, I think buried. My brother, you see different people react differently. My older brother, he had the same sort of life that I had. Both were abused, different families, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, all those things. And he ended up committing suicide when he was, before his 21st birthday. I always kept going. I don't know what it was, I don't know why that is, but something in me just buried it. But you know, one thing that keeps coming up through your life is one day you're going to have to learn to live with Vickie. There's a time of reckoning where you have to come face to face with who you are.
And the word redeemed comes in?
The word redeemed comes in because once you recognise who you are, you can turn from that. You can make a change. And redemption is about turning from, you know, what you are, what's happened, and redeeming the years, redeeming life, and having a new opportunity. Yeah.
Vickie, thank you for that positive note.
Thank you.
And now you're watching Support Life, and we'll be back again after this break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch and our guest is Vickie Janson. Vickie, we've touched on so much, but I want to kind of wind it back a little bit to your mum.
Yes.
And in my English class, my teacher would always remind me to use the word good followed by better followed by best.
Right.
So would you like to play with those words for a minute?
Well, yes, good, better and best. Maybe I'll go back to what Susie O'Brien said, that it would be better for people who are unwanted to not be born at all. And I think this is the big question, is it really better? And when I look at my mother, so let's forget me, it certainly wouldn't have been better for me. I wouldn't be here. My husband wouldn't have the wife he has. My son would never exist. And I think that's a big thing, that whole, we're part of something much, much bigger. But my mother, for her, as a young woman, what happened in her life? And, her son ultimately committed suicide. And when she was only a few years before she died, her whole life was redeemed, as mine had been. She later followed, and our relationship changed, and we were very close. And before she died, she gave me a little doll, a little angel doll, and on that inscription of that angel doll, it says, "There is no better friend than a daughter, and no daughter quite like you." You know, speaking of the uniqueness of every single life, you can't just replace a child. So I've got a little child here actually, 12 weeks from conception, and that was me. And had I been gone, discarded at 12 weeks, there will never be another Vickie Janson, and there will never be another anybody. So, everyone is unique. I think, we've got to keep that bigger picture, that it's bigger than just me. And for my mother, had she taken that option, is it really a choice? She would have felt maybe she had no choice. That's what most say who take that option. She would have ended her life a very lonely old woman with no children and no grandchildren, because I am her sole source of child and grandchild. So for her, she looked at me and she wanted to say, "I'm sorry, Vickie," but I could see she was struggling to find the words, and I said, "You don't need to say it, Mum." So the whole situation was redeemed, and she died happy with family around her. How different would it have been if she had have, terminated me as a little babe?
I like the word pro-choice, because we're making choices all the time, and she made a good choice.
Yes.
And at the end, it was redeemable.
Well, that's right. She did actually have a choice, and most women don't have a choice. They think they've got no choice. That's why they have an abortion. But there are better choices. They're better choices.
Now, let's throw two more words in, destiny and legacy.
Yes, destiny and legacy. Well, I do worry about, what legacy we are leaving to children if we tell them that they are just a random accident, that they have no purpose, that they can be aborted before they're born, therefore they're not important, and we can euthanize the elderly. That seems to me like we're promoting a culture of death. Why would we be surprised that so many young adults are committing suicide? Where is the life message? Where there is life, there is hope. Things can be redeemed. And they're not getting that message because we don't give that message. And I often think, even with the Christian message, people say we don't want those Bible stories in school. But children need hope. They need to live in a story. And as you mature, you can analyse that story rationally, in a mature way, and decide what you want about it for yourself. You can make a choice, but children need a story to live in, and this is a story that gives hope and life.
Now, are you writing a story called The Joseph Story? Would you like to pad that out a little bit?
Well, that was interesting. Well, it's not exactly writing a story. I was telling a story. I was telling my story before the federal election. I was sharing my life story publicly with a few people. And I was weaving it through the Joseph story, which is a story about rejection, family rejecting you, and Joseph had all kinds of dramas, and some of those I could liken to my own life. And that was very interesting. But 3 days after the election, I got a phone call from the Salvation Army Family Tracing Service to find out that, they'd found my father. Now, though he'd passed away, the most interesting thing about this is that my father apparently had 11 siblings, just like Joseph. And so it was quite amazing to me to actually discover that and to find out that I wasn't alone, I wasn't nobody's child, and that God had been looking after me all these years. And I actually have 2 sisters and a brother that I didn't know existed. So that is redemption. I have a huge family now.
That is so interesting. And geographically, they are placed where?
In New Zealand. In New Zealand, yeah. So it is a very interesting story. So I flew back to meet my sisters. I've met the sisters, not the brother, just late last year. So that was really exciting. And it was interesting to see the similarities, to be honest, and to hear their story and to hear about the father that I didn't know. Yeah, and I think that it does put it all together, puts the puzzle together. Everyone's looking for who they are, their identity. But in all this, I feel all over through my life, I've always felt that I've had a Heavenly Father that's been watching over it and putting it together kind of like a puzzle, step by step.
Let's just focus on your earthly father for a moment.
Yes, okay.
What were some of the wonders of that, of discovering who he was, even though he'd passed away?
Well, I think the biggest thing was that I never entertained the thought that he would ever want me, because I'd carried this I'm nobody's child thing, this rejection thing all my life. And I didn't realise that it would have such a big impact, but the thing that really, if I could say, hit me in the spirit when the Salvation Army service told me about him was that they said, your family wants you to know that your father was sorry that he always wanted to be part of your life, and that actually we had been written into his eulogy, and yet I'd never met him, and so that he'd never forgotten. And yet, that was a thought that I had never entertained, that my father actually cared. And it was so powerful and so freeing. And I think that there are a lot of men that really, they mature, as do the girls, life changes, and people do care about their children. It's perfectly natural.
So here's a legacy that's written into a eulogy.
Yes.
And there's a discovery here for you.
Yes, there's a discovery that my father did care, that he did love me, that circumstances didn't ever permit me to know that I, and what it meant to find that out was amazing for me. Yeah.
Well, Vickie, we've certainly gone on an interesting journey.
Yes.
It's your story and it's real. And I just want to thank you for giving us the time to share that and touching on issues which sometimes we may not want to reflect on or consider, but I think we've got good reason to maybe take some notes and look at this program again.
Thank you.
You have been watching Support Life. Join us again next week.